Good morning. Thank you all for being here today at Fresno County Sheriff's headquarters for an update regarding the investigation into the egregious and senseless murder of Selma Police Officer Gonzalo Carrasco. It has been a difficult 3 days, to say the least, for law enforcement here in the Fresno area, the Fresno County Sheriff's Office, Selma Police Department, and allied law enforcement agencies after the loss of Officer Carrasco. But during that time, the investigation has to go on. So we have an update to the investigation and some information regarding the case that I'll provide you with here. On Tuesday, around 11:52 a.m., Selma Police Officer Gonzalo Carrasco was patrolling the 2600 block of Pine Street in the city of Selma. He pulled over to conduct a subject check on an individual who was walking down the street and acting suspiciously. That individual was later identified as Nathaniel Dixon. While Officer Carrasco was talking to the individual, there was a neighbor nearby that came out and advised Officer Carrasco that that individual did not live at the residence where he was at in the yard acting suspicious. At that point, Officer Carrasco got out of his vehicle and began to approach the suspect, who was later identified as Nathaniel Dixon, 23 years of age. Dixon immediately pulled out a gun and fired several shots, striking Officer Carrasco. Dixon took off running while he was still armed with his gun, which was later determined to be a ghost gun, a .223 caliber style assault rifle. A nearby citizen called 911 and told dispatchers that someone had shot an officer. Immediately, officers from the Selma Police Department, Fresno County Sheriff's Office, CAL FIRE, Selma EMS came to the area, arrived on scene, and provided medical aid to Officer Carrasco, who was shot laying in the street bleeding. Soon after, he was transported to Community Regional Medical Center to receive treatment for his injuries. Unfortunately, later that afternoon, Officer Carrasco succumbed to his injuries and passed away at Community Regional Medical Center. But the multiple officers and deputies who responded to the area and began searching for the gunman, who had been described as having a tattoo on his face with a closing description, were able to locate him around 12:10 p.m. One of our deputies spotted the suspect near Fig and Sequoia, and he was immediately taken into custody. The suspect, Dixon, was not armed at the time. Law enforcement were concerned due to the fact that he had been armed at the time of the crime and made it a top priority to find that gun, especially since Eric White Elementary School was in that immediate vicinity, and they knew it was right along Dixon's escape path from where he'd shot Officer Carrasco. Our concern was that a child might get their hands on that weapon. After an extensive search, deputies were able to find the gun in a homeowner's yard, along with several other personal items Dixon had discarded along the route from where he had shot Officer Carrasco to the point where he was taken into custody. At that time, the Selma Police Department requested that the Fresno County Sheriff's Office take over this investigation regarding the shooting of Officer Carrasco. We took it over. We've worked it for the last several days. We've gathered a lot of good evidence. We've got good witness statements. I believe we put together a very good case against the suspect, Nathaniel Dixon, regarding the senseless shooting and killing of police officer Gonzalo Carrasco. A couple points I want to make is that leading up to this, where Officer Carrasco was shot and killed, that's what's wrong with our criminal justice system. Gang members, convicted felons, individuals who have no legal authority to possess firearms, having them out on our streets, able to hurt residents and individuals in our communities. This individual was a convicted felon. He did not have any right to have that gun. He should have never had that gun. Unfortunately, the gun that he had was a ghost gun, was not legally purchased, was purchased in parts, having no serialized numbers, parts that he could order to his house, put together, go out into our community and commit these acts of violence. What went right that day was everything that occurred after Officer Carrasco was shot. The response from the law enforcement agencies, from the Sheriff's Office of Fresno County to the Selma Police Department, to our partners at the California Highway Patrol, the California Department of Justice, and many other allied law enforcement agencies rallying together, getting to the scene, giving, and our fire personnel as well, I don't want to forget them, giving Officer Carrasco aid and ensuring that he gets to the hospital to get the absolute best treatment possible. And then the subsequent search, location of the suspect, taking him into custody, ensuring that this violent individual, this monster, is no longer on our streets and that our community is safe from him, recovering the firearm so young school children couldn't get it, recovering evidence that would help us make the case against Nathaniel Dixon for the killing of Officer Gonzalo Carrasco. At this time, I would like to have Selma Police Chief Rudy Alcaraz come up and give some more comments regarding this investigation.
Thank you all for coming. First, I'd like to start with some thank yous. I'd like to thank the Fresno County Sheriff's Department, the Fresno District Attorney's Office, all of our other allied agencies in getting us some resolve to this tragic event. Additionally, I want to thank the Sheriff's Department for taking over patrol operations in the city of Selma for the past few days to allow our officers some time to grieve with their families, take all this in, and process this tragic event as we move forward in providing community services or policing services with the city of Selma. Additionally, I want to speak to the great human being who is Gonzalo Carrasco. Here's a young man that did everything right. He was born and raised in the city of Reedley, a native of Reedley. He decided at a young age he wanted to pursue a career in law enforcement. He became a police explorer with the city of Reedley, then came over to the city of Selma, was a volunteer in policing. Beyond that, he became a reserve police officer with the city of Selma, and then in 2021 he accomplished his dream of becoming a police officer with the Selma Police Department. Gonzalo Carrasco was a great human being with a great smile. I apologize. These times are difficult. The emotion gets in the way. But I want to ensure that everyone knows that this young man came from a great family. His parents did everything right. He did everything right. And the biggest tragedy that someone that did nothing right in their life took that greatness from this world, robbed this family, crushed their aspirations for Gonzalo, crushed the community spirit. However, I just want everyone to know that the Selma Police Department, all of our allied agencies will come together, will build stronger to ensure that our communities are safe. With that, I'll leave with that.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Smittcamp, and I have the pleasure and honor of being the Fresno County District Attorney. This morning, I would like to announce that Nathaniel Michael Dixon, date of birth November 9, 1999, was formally charged in a 2-count criminal complaint in the Fresno County Superior Court for his actions that resulted in the death of Officer Carrasco. Count 1 alleges that on January 31st, 2023, in the county of Fresno, defendant Nathaniel Michael Dixon committed a violation of Penal Code Section 187A, the willful, deliberate, premeditated first-degree murder of Officer Gonzalo Carrasco, Jr. Several enhancements to this crime have also been added. It is further alleged that the defendant Dixon personally discharged a firearm that caused the death of Officer Carrasco pursuant to Penal Code Section 12022.53D. Furthermore, it is alleged that the murder of Officer Carrasco was committed by defendant Dixon while he was engaged in his official duties as a police officer within the meaning of Penal Code Section 190.2, subsection A, subsection 7. Count 2 alleges that on January 31st, 2023, in the county of Fresno, that the defendant Dixon was a convicted felon in possession of a firearm in violation of Penal Code Section 29800, subsection A, subsection 1. Defendant Dixon has also suffered a prior conviction for a serious felony, namely a violation of Section 211 of the Penal Code, commonly referred to as robbery, and that he suffered that conviction in the Fresno County Superior Court in July of 2020. For this conviction, he is facing enhancements under Penal Code Section 667A1 and 667B through I, and 1170.2A, commonly referred to as a prior strike conviction under California's three strikes law. This morning, the defendant appeared at an arraignment. That arraignment did not occur. It was continued at the request of the public defender. He remains in custody at the Fresno County Jail, and his current bail is set at no bail. He will reappear in court for a continued arraignment on February the 23rd of 2023. This murder qualifies as a special circumstances murder under the California Penal Code, and the penalty for such a crime is either life without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. The assigned prosecutor in this case is standing right behind me. She is our Chief Deputy District Attorney in the Homicide Unit, and her name is Deborah Miller. I would like to thank Sheriff John Zanoni and the Fresno Sheriff's Department for allowing the Investigative Bureau of the Fresno County District Attorney's Office the privilege and honor of working on some of the small investigative efforts involved in this case. This county is special. This county is a county where we come together to work together to solve crimes, especially the most egregious ones of murder. Also, I would like to again extend my most sincere condolences to the family of Officer Gonzalo Carrasco Jr., Chief Alcaraz, and the Selma Police Department, and also the Reedley Police Department, where Officer Carrasco began his love of the law enforcement community by serving as an explorer there. I want to also offer my condolences to the people in the communities of Selma and Reedley. These are small towns with close-knit relationships, and today all of us mourn with you. Officer Gonzalo Carrasco was a fine human being. I never had the opportunity to meet him or to work with him, but I can tell you, as a 26-year law enforcement veteran, that he was our hope for the future. He was the type of young officer that we all look at and say, there's hope for this young generation. And he was stolen away by a person who had no regard for human life. And as John Zanoni said, our new sheriff has a great concept of what's happening in the state of California. Today we are here not only to talk about the life of Officer Gonzalez, the charges that are waged against him, but we have to take this opportunity for people in the community to take responsibility to get involved in the voting process, because the way this state is going, with no accountability and no responsibility for people who commit crimes, the Department of Corrections is letting people out left and right. Get out of jail free cards, just getting handed out. This has to stop, because as we can see now, it is creating more victims, it is creating more bloodshed, and it is creating more violence in our communities. And with that, I will turn it over to Sheriff Zanoni.
DA Smittcamp, thank you for those remarks. At this time, we've given an overview of several parts of the investigation related to what occurred out at the scene, how the city of Selma and the Selma Police Department are reacting to this, and then the prosecutorial side from District Attorney Lisa Smittcamp. So I will open it up to any questions that you have for us here today.
Question for District Attorney Smittcamp. David Talbot, GUI. Here's from the court record that the suspect was arrested 5 times in 2019, a couple times for carjacking. Case was adjudicated in July 2020. Tell us why in that case, and then a couple weeks later, after he gets a 1-year suspended sentence, he's arrested 2 times in August 2020. And then that's the case that he spends time in jail, and then last year, he gets sentenced to 5 years. So in those 2 cases, why big plea deals?
Okay, well that's, if we were in court, David, I would say objection compound, because that's about 7 questions all in one, but I'm going to do my best to answer those questions. When AB 109 was enacted, do you remember back to AB 109, 2014-ish? The Supreme Court said that the California Department of Corrections was overcrowded, and no one in California thought that it was a good idea to build more prisons for the prison population that we already had. So AB 109 was enacted, and there was a list of enumerated crimes that came with AB 109 that became prison ineligible. So what happened was there was a significant amount of inmates that were released from the Department of Corrections and placed into jails. Some were released out into the community, and we started to live sort of a new life where there are crimes enumerated under 1170H of the Penal Code that are now crimes where we may not send people to the prison. So the prison population could come down, and this is the overarching goal of the current administration under the governor is to close prisons. And those are words that come out of his own mouth, right? He wants to close prisons. And they want to prove that these criminal justice reforms that they are implementing under propositions are actually working, right? So keep that in mind. So when that happened in 2014, we had to change the way that we do things, because there are beds now that are taken up in local jails, not just in Fresno, but in every county, by people who belong in prison for committing numerous felonies, violent felonies, career criminals. They are now in the local jails. So that's why we now have more problems with overcrowding in local jails, in Fresno and in everywhere else, in all counties throughout the state. So when you sit there, right, when a tragedy like this happens and everybody goes back and says, well, why were all these times he was not in custody, he was not in jail? Well, it's because sometimes there's no bed space, right, in the jail for people who have committed crimes but maybe have not yet been convicted of them. In addition, in 2020, we had the COVID crisis where the jail was forced to do, to work miracles in trying to quarantine people, keep people healthy, and you need space for quarantine, right? So there were even less people in local jails. So in this case, just specifically with Mr. Dixon was given a grant of probation, which is not uncommon for the crime he committed for that robbery. Because of the fact that he was a younger felon, a new felon. So despite the fact that the misnomer in the world and the urban legends are that, all prosecutors want to send everybody to prison for every first felony, that's really not true, and it wasn't true in the case of Mr. Dixon. So he was on probation for that robbery case, which is a strike. He was on probation for that case, and when he committed that, yes, he had other interactions with law enforcement. He continued to violate his terms and conditions of his probation. On August the 7th, he was involved in an incident where he was arrested. He was involved with a gun. He was a felon in possession of a gun. And at that time, during the pandemic, there was no room in the jail for people like that. Because if you go back to those enumerated crimes under 1170H and some of those prioritizations that the jail is forced to do because of the lack of bed space, all dating back to AB 109, there are priorities, right? And you look at people's criminal histories, you look at their age, you look at their gang involvement, you look at certain things. And felon in possession of a gun was one of those crimes that sadly there were people that committed more egregious crimes because he didn't use that gun. If he had done an attempted murder or an assault with that weapon, maybe he wouldn't have been let out, but he was. 2 weeks later, he again contacted police. He was involved in a case where he had methamphetamine and a gun, and he was taken into custody again. And at that time, he had a violation of probation. He had the gun, felon in possession gun case, which he should have been in custody for. The Sheriff's Department would have loved to keep him in custody. We would have loved to keep him in custody. But because of the pushback from all the inmates that are in the jail, that belong in the prison, there just aren't enough beds. So when he was taken in now on the third time, right? Probation violation, first encounter, second encounter. He remained in custody, and we litigated those cases. So during the pandemic, during that period of time, mid-2020, he was in custody earning time credits. When his case was litigated and settled, and I think this is a really important thing for everyone to understand, 98 to 99% of cases in the state of California in every county are settled out prior to trial, right? We hear this term plea bargain like it's a dirty word. It's what we do every day. And the plea bargaining process is the process to sit down, defense attorneys, probation officers if the person's on probation, and the DA, and we try to come up with a sentence that is appropriate and fair. Fair for the victim, fair for the community, and fair for the defendant. Because, again, despite the misnomer that everyone that wears a badge wants everyone in prison, it's simply not true. So we try to make plea bargains or plea deals where the punishment fits the crime. In this case, despite all of the misinformation, lies, bad information that has come from the governor's office about how he was exposed to decades in prison, that's simply not true. He was looking at about 6 years, 8 months from his last probation report as a maximum. The deal that was made, the plea bargain that was made, was for 5 years and 4 months. A prison sentence. When you go to prison, after you spend time in the local jail, you get time credits. Pre-Prop 57, which is a whole another subject, which I could stand here for a really long time and talk about, Prop 57 not only changed the California Constitution and gave get-out-of-jail-free cards to very serious felons who were in prison, but it also changed the way that the time credits are calculated by the Department of Corrections. And it's very important to remember that the Department of Corrections is run by the Office of the Governor. And if we will recall, by his own words, the goal of the governor is to close prisons. Doesn't matter that the population has increased. It doesn't matter that there are more people here. It doesn't matter that there are more criminals. It doesn't matter that crime is out of control. California's not building more prisons. With that being said, before Prop 57, a defendant like Dixon who had a prior serious or violent felony, which was his robbery, would have done 80% of that 5-year, 4-month sentence. Post Prop 57, he only has to do 50% of that. In addition to the fact now that under Governor Newsom, he has implemented administratively what he calls regulations. And he and the people who run the Department of Corrections are arbitrarily granting inmates accelerated time credits, increased time credits. In the old days, before 57, when an inmate was sentenced, the abstract of judgment that said 5 years, 4 months was the gospel. Now, those time credits are manipulated by the Department of Corrections. The Department of Corrections then does an intake. They evaluate what we call the abstract of judgment, which is the communication that goes from the court to the Department of Corrections. And then they start their own calculations, the 50% under Prop 57 and all the arbitrary credits that they give them. For instance, if you are a nonviolent felon, which under the code, Mr. Dixon was a nonviolent felon on his committing crimes, you get a certain amount of days credit. Arbitrarily. So the Department of Corrections comes up with their own calculations. And I have spent an inordinate amount of time over the last 72 hours talking to every expert in this county and in this state about time credits, because quite honestly, there is information I have discovered in this case that I wasn't even aware of. Because when you're the prosecutor, your job ends with the conviction and the recommendation to the court of what the sentencing is. The courts and the judges are the ones who impose the sentence. I think that's very important for people in the community to understand. And once those people go off to prison, we go on to the next cases. And we really don't see them again unless they violate probation after they're released. So we are not the sentencing experts. We rely on the probation department for that, and we rely on people within the state who are experts in that. And I have reached out to all of those people. And I have been informed that right now in 2023, the average prisoner who goes to the Department of Correction serves 1/3 of the time they are sentenced by the judge in their sentencing counties. 1/3. It's atrocious. Mr. Dixon should have been in custody. He should be serving 80% of his time pre-Prop 57. And even if he was to only serve the 50%, he still should have been in, because he was given credits inside the Department of Corrections that he did not earn. I'm going to say it again. In the old days, I'm making myself sound really old, but there were time credits that were given in the Department of Corrections. If you earned your GED, they gave you a certain amount of days. If you participated in work inside of the prison, they gave you time credit. Prisoners were able to earn time credits. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a great system. I think it's a system we should go back to. Because when you empower criminals and you gift them time credits, because that's what that is, it is a gift to them. It empowers their behavior. We do not live in a society where it is shameful in all circles to be involved in gangs. We do not live in a society where in our circles it is shameful to be a human trafficker or a gun-toting violent criminal who takes what they want whenever they want it. There is a sector of our population where that is cool. And there are many criminals that come through the Fresno County Court that do not want local jail. They want to go to prison because it gives them cred. It gives them street credibility. It makes them higher up in their gangs. And the status of the Department of Corrections in the state of California right now is deplorable and despicable. Because not only is it not serving victims of crime, it is not serving inmates. It is called the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. There is no corrections and there is no rehabilitation that is going on inside those walls. People are just being pushed out, pushed out, pushed out. And when you take a criminal who comes from that element where they are empowered and they are encouraged by committing crimes and you do nothing to them to try to stop them or deter them or redirect them or rehabilitate them or educate them, guess what they're going to do? They're going to come out more empowered and they're going to walk down the streets of Selma with a ghost gun and they're going to kill people. They're going to kill cops. They're going to kill good human beings who've done everything right. And you know what? The killing of Officer Carrasco is an example. It's a terrible example. It's the worst example because it's the murder of a good human, a young human, an expectant father, a son, a brother, a friend. But there are hundreds of people that are victimized every single day in lesser manners, maybe, and in less high-profile ways in cases by the same type of person that Dixon is. Because there's no help for these people when they do go into prison. There isn't one prisoner that should come out of the Department of Corrections without a GED. Because a lot of them go in illiterate and they come out illiterate. There isn't one person that goes into the Department of Corrections that should not come out with a job skill. That should not come out with some opportunity to find faith or spirituality or religion or education. But instead, under Governor Brown and Governor Newsom, the California Department of Corrections is college for criminals. And the only thing that happens in these prisons is they are empowered, they are elevated in their gangs, and they come out worse than they went in. That's the status of the state of California. So if I seem angry and I seem frustrated, I am. Because it is time for everyone in this state to say enough is enough. This is not good for victims. It is not good for community. It is not good for economy. It is not good for criminal defendants who are struggling to do something good with their lives that gives them no hope and no opportunity. So that's the answer to your 7 questions.
And one more.
Haven't you heard enough?
Well, you violated probation after he was released in September 2022.
Yes.
And he's only sentenced to 30 days for that violation. Is that enough?
No, absolutely not. It's not enough. The other thing, David, is that the other thing that Governor Newsom has done, you know, I've been quoted a few times in the last few days, and I have said, what has he done well? DMV is a mess. The prisons are a mess. Education's a mess. We have more homeless and more violent criminals out on the street, more guns. EDD, let's talk about that. The hundreds of billions of dollars that went out the door under his watch. But you know what he's done really well? He's abolished parole. He's neutered the parole department. Because guess what? Talk about defunding the police. He's defunded parole. We used to be able in law enforcement officers, prosecutors, we used to be able to depend on parole. Because when you're on parole and you commit a crime, that's a violation of your parole. That's a separate situation and a separate issue. And then you have the new crime. Today, the orders of the governor for parole agents, if the local prosecutors file a case, dump the parole violation. Am I right? Am I lying? We can't depend on parole anymore to help us. And it's nothing to do with the parole agents. They're all great people, but they're under directives. So in this overarching goal of closing prisons, they can't go through the penal code and change every single sentence that is attached to a crime. So what have they done? Because these people in Sacramento who are doing this, they're not stupid people. They're crafty. They're good. And we're behind. You know what they do? They've now manipulated how long people stay in prison. They can't lessen the number of years that courts are sentencing people to. So Prop 57 is genius if you don't like incarceration. Prop 57 is genius if you don't like law and order. Prop 57 is genius if you want anarchy in the state of California, because they've done it well. So they've manipulated the amount of time that people spend in prison. And you've all heard me rant and rave about elder parole and youthful offender parole. I mean, I could stay here for an hour talking about all the ways that there are to get out of prison. And Officer Carrasco's death is going to shine light on this madness and this anarchy if it is the last thing that I do. Any other questions?
Austin Marie, Channel 53. This can be either for the sheriff or the
You go
police
right ahead.
chief. Is anything actively being done right now to stop the gang activity that's happening, not only in California, but obviously in the Central Valley? Are there any special operations, raids, maybe enforcements planned?
We work every day here with our task force, what we call MAGIC, Multi-Agency Gang Enforcement Consortium. We work every day to combat gangs, to get gang members who are violent off the streets, to get guns off the streets here in Fresno County. We work with all of our law enforcement partners, from the Fresno Police Department to the DA's office to CHP, ATF. We are constantly working on these things. And yes, there is always a gang operation to do in Fresno County. I could start 3 today if I had the amount of staffing and resources to do it, because there is a lot of stuff going on out there that is really bad for our community. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of gang members planning violence, and they're doing a lot of things that are just unthinkable. I believe Sheriff Boudreaux in Tulare County had a press conference earlier regarding the killing of 6 people in Goshen. Another example of gang members and convicted felons in our communities with guns illegally, whether they're ghost guns, stolen guns, or however they got them, killing people. And what we have to realize here in the state of California is I see more legislation coming out to restrict those individuals who are lawful gun owners. Law-abiding residents of our state cannot possess CCWs, or they're trying to restrict where they can have them. And you think about the gun laws that impact your average resident who is just trying to protect themselves or take their kid hunting and purchase ammunition, and the restrictions that we have to go through for even myself to buy ammunition. And then you look at individuals like Mr. Dixon and gang members, I mean, too numerous to list, who have no problem getting handguns, assault rifles, ammunition, and things like that. We're focusing on the wrong group. We need to stay away from the law-abiding residents and the CCW holders, and we need to focus on the criminals. Because every day in Fresno County alone, we have our deputy sheriffs, because I can speak to that because I know, getting ghost guns off of convicted felons, off of gang members, getting stolen firearms off of gang members, and it happens daily. Just the other day, we had a convicted felon that had 2 ghost guns on him, one in his waistband and one on his ankle. And he got in a fight with one of our deputies, a tussle. I don't know what would have happened had our deputy not been successful in taking the individual into custody. But that's where we got to focus. And you want to talk about prison population? You would talk about AB 109? Our jail population has, or capacity at our jail right here across the street and right behind me, has not increased since the early 2000s. Yeah, we had AB 109, but we didn't get funding to build a new facility. Yes, we're building the West Annex jail, but as part of that agreement, we have to close the South Annex jail. So our net gain of available jail beds in Fresno County, there is no gain. But yet we keep closing prisons. And since probably 2010 or so, the prisons have reduced their bed capacity in the state of California by almost 60,000 beds. We're arresting people. We're prosecuting them under the law. But guess what? Where are we going to put them? And I'm not talking about petty thieves and people with drug problems or somebody that stole a car here and there. We're talking about felons with guns. Where do they go? I don't have room for them over here. You reduce the prison population, so guess where they go? A shorter stint in jail or a shorter stint in prison and right back out on our streets to commit crimes against good people in our communities, commit homicides like you see in Goshen with 6 people being killed, killing police officers in Selma, killing deputy sheriffs in Riverside County. When is enough enough? Our population in Fresno County is over 1 million people. I am not of the opinion that everybody needs to go to jail or prison, but at some point, the available bed space in some small percentage has to keep up with the growing population, because not everybody is going to conform to the law. Not everybody is going to obey the law. Not everybody is going to make those good decisions. And we have to have some place for these people to be so they can't hurt people in our community. That's the bottom line. If we want a safe community, those are the things that we need to do. Because if we don't, we're going to continue on down this road and we're going to see more and more of this. And when is enough enough? I've had enough. I've worked in law enforcement for over 26 years. And when I started and I was in the Magic back in the early 2000s and you arrested somebody for possession of a gun, possession of methamphetamine, and they had prison priors, they went to prison, they did time, and they weren't there to negatively impact and harm people in our community. Does anybody have any other questions?
Yes, this is for the chief. You know, you talked about how emotional this has been for the community to lose the officer. How do you feel about his death being tied to such a political issue now?
I would agree with Lisa. I think this is a wake-up call for everybody. This isn't downtown Los Angeles, Echo Park. This is America, USA, small town, right? I'll be nice. This person felt brazen enough to pull out an assault rifle in broad daylight in a residential neighborhood in front of witnesses and kill one of our officers. He only did that because he felt comfortable enough to do so, because he felt he could get away. So what I'll say is I hope that some good can come of this, and that legislators can then start making some decisions with some logic and reason that actually makes sense.
So this is for all 3 of you. Just looking at how this entire community, not just law enforcement, but really the entire community, still reeling from Officer Carrasco's death. What do you want to say about getting him justice and the next steps in getting him justice? Thanks, good.
I want to address your comment real quick. You said this about being a political issue. I don't want to politicize this issue any more than I have to, and I'm sure DA Smittcamp doesn't either. But when is enough enough? This is a failed system. It's broken. Take this incident out of it. It's been broken for a while. It's failing. This experiment of our criminal justice reform in California is not working. Okay? I hate to use this incident or even mention it, but the issue that I have is we're dealing with legislators and elected individuals. That's politics. So in order to prevent something like this from happening again to a police officer, a deputy sheriff, or a member of our community, you have to make it somewhat political to get the message out to those politicians, because that's what they are in Sacramento. They're politicians, to make changes to legislation and law, to make improvements so we can better protect people in our communities, and especially police officers. I mean, this is outrageous. This is 12 o'clock in the afternoon, basically, in broad daylight. This individual thinks it is okay and acceptable to shoot an assault rifle at a police officer who's out there doing his job. Took his American dream away. I mean, that's the reality of it. I've talked to people in Reedley who knew this kid. This was his dream. He came here, and this individual had no right to do that. So we have to affect change, and we'll do what it takes to affect that change to make sure that hopefully this doesn't happen again. Unfortunately, it probably will, but we have to fight the good fight. That's the bottom line. Thank you.
And I have a comment also. So This is political because of the reasons that the sheriff has said. But I'm going to give you the reality. Hundreds of people in Fresno County are victimized by people like Dixon every day. Throughout the state of California, there's thousands who are victimized by people who have come out of prison early and not had the proper rehabilitation or not taken advantage of good opportunities from their probation officers or their programming. And guess what? You all don't show up for those, because I would stand in front of my office every day and give you an update. You want one? I'll give it to you every day. Nobody cares about Joe Schmo. Nobody cares about Jane Doe. People listen when there's a police officer killed. Look at all this media here today. Why are you here? You're here because a police officer was shot. And so if people want to try to accuse us of politicizing this and taking advantage of it or exploiting the death of Officer Carrasco, they can do it all day long, because that's not the truth. The truth is we are here because this is our reality. Every day, these officers that wear these badges go out and risk their lives. They may not come home to their families every single day because of the irresponsibility of the people in Sacramento who've never worn a badge, who don't know anything about law enforcement, who've never prosecuted a case, who've never defended one of these people, who's never been one of their probation officers, and they continue to implement these policies which are the agendas of the people who fill their coffers. Because no decent and smart human being can think that this is a good idea. It's awful. It's awful for everybody, for the criminal element, for the black people, for the Hispanic people, for the white people, for the Asian people, for all religions, all walks of life, all socioeconomic backgrounds. This is not a good thing. No accountability and no responsibility leads to anarchy. And that's why we are here for Officer Carrasco. And he is not going to die in vain if any of us have anything to say about it. So thank you for asking that question, because it's very important. And Vanessa, I'm going to answer your question. After 26 years of being a prosecutor, serving on the homicide unit, supervising Deborah, working with her every day, how she works with victims of homicide every day, I'm going to say this, and it might not sound very nice. I don't know that there is ever any justice for families like this. Is there maybe a little closure? Is there maybe a little feeling that something did happen to try to assist with the healing process? Maybe. But what is justice for a mother who loses their child? What is justice for a father who dreamed of watching his son and working so hard to support them? Because you know what? Officer Carrasco's parents took him to every soccer game, to every sporting event, every event at his elementary school. They invested in him like we all invest in our children, and we have that right as citizens of the United States of America to live in peace. That's what we live in this country for, is to raise our family, enjoy times, go to church, go to picnics, enjoy sporting events. And that family was robbed of that. Nothing that happens in the Fresno County Superior Court is going to bring him back to their family. So part of what we do is, yes, we try to get justice. But what does that mean? What we have to do, too, to try to help the family heal a little bit, is to also ensure that this person never does this again. Because when someone does this type of behavior, they lose the right to walk amongst the free people. He has had many opportunities to fix himself. He is not chosen. And it's never a good day. Nobody likes to say, oh, this person's going to go to jail or prison for the rest of their life. Do you think that makes any of us happy? It doesn't. It's not a win. There's no winning in the work that we do. It's always sad. Even when there's a great case and there's a victory, there's a guilty verdict. That's not a good thing if someone's going to go to prison for the rest of their life. But it is the reality of the life that we live in, the world that we live in, is that some people choose not to abide by the law, just as the sheriff was saying. And so there is really, that term we use, justice. Is there justice for any mom who loses their baby? I don't think so.
You talked about, I'm sorry, you talked about determining whether or not to pursue the death penalty. How will that be determined?
So that's a very standard process that we go through in every case that will be done in this case, right? So these crimes, are eligible for the death penalty. So what will happen is Chief Miller will take this case. Once the defendant is arraigned and an attorney is assigned, there will be a process of what we call discovery, where we exchange information, and they will have an opportunity to give us information about the defendant's social history, anything that they want to say. We will review that, and there is a panel inside the DA's office who will make a determination as to whether or not this case will go for the penalty of life without the possibility of parole or the death penalty.
I just want to add just a little bit about the justice. Like Lisa said, I don't know if there is justice, but what I would like to see is our community members stand up and support our fallen officer, Gonzalo Carrasco. Will services, times, dates, and all of those pertinent information will be coming out soon. I'd love to see the community out there supporting Gonzalo, so that the parents know that his life, everything he stood for, was bigger than himself, bigger than all of us up here on this stage today. And the things that he did, the things that all of our brothers do in law enforcement every day, going out there willing to put themselves on the line, we do that because it's bigger than us. What we do is bigger than us. We define that line of safety. So that's what I'd like to see, not so much for me, but for the family of Gonzalo Carrasco. So please.
Chief, I'm sure you've had a lot of conversations with his family over the past few days. Anything that you want to share with us, or any message from them that you want to relay from his parents, from his siblings?
I know that they absolutely would appreciate the privacy as they go through this grieving process. I know that they are, they'd love to see a great showing of support from our community members beyond law enforcement, because we know there's a lot of great people in Fresno County that, and we know that because we're getting calls daily, inundated, not just at the Selma Police Department, through the Sheriff's Department, the Highway Patrol, calls from all throughout the nation with generous donations, just wanting to convey their support and their grievance and the loss of Officer Carrasco. So I know the family would love to see that support.
How would you guys like to see one day maybe a new bill, and calling it the Officer Carrasco bill, to change things?
What I'll say to that is that'd obviously be great. However, I think that what's going on is a bigger conversation beyond AB 109, beyond Prop 57. I spoke at a vigil last night, and we talked with the community members of Selma, and one of the most important message, and this message is not specific to Selma. This message is specific to our communities, is we all as community members have a responsibility to keep one another safe. It's not just relied upon the police department, city government, faith-based leaders, business owners, or citizens themselves. We all have a responsibility to keep one another safe and watch out for one another. And that's just basic human kindness. And so that's how I'll answer that.
How long had Mr. Dixon was in? How long had Dixon been in Selma?
Hold on, one at a time.
Do we know what gang Mr. Dixon was in?
Mr. Dixon was in a criminal street gang here in Fresno County. He had a large tattoo of a bulldog on the side of his face, and I think the rest of that is pretty much self-explanatory as to who and what gang he was in, and I'm not going to give it any more attention here because they don't deserve it.
Officer Carrasco, was he wearing a bulletproof vest or any type of protective equipment?
At this point, he was wearing his standard issued equipment from the City of Selma Police Department. I don't know exactly what that was. Chief Alcaraz might be able to answer that better. But he was wearing protective equipment, yes, as do all members of law enforcement.
How long had Dixon been in Selma? And had Selma PD had any interaction with him before?
Did you guys? Dixon had been in Selma for some time. Absolutely, the Selma Police Department had numerous contacts with him and had filed numerous charges on him. And I think some of those cases are what Lisa alluded to earlier today.
And we've heard that he didn't fire his weapon. How long was the interaction? Multiple weapons?
We're not going to answer those investigative questions. Thank you, though.
Chief, do you want to talk a little bit more about Carrasco and any conversations you've had with him about his career aspirations, and just, kind of give us more detail with him?
So I'll pretense that with I worked for the Selma Police Department for 20 years prior to going to the city of Fowler as a police chief, and then returning almost 5 years to the day back in Selma. When I walked back into Selma as a police chief, there were so many new faces, so many new officers. What I'll say about Carrasco is we did not get to have those conversations with me. I know he had those conversations with his sergeant because we recognize him as a budding star in the organization. But what I will tell you know about the young man is I reference him as he's the one that's always smiling, because he had this phenomenal smile that lit up the room every time he walked in. He was always positive. I really appreciated and love that about him. That's what I'll remember most about Officer Carrasco. But that's probably all I can say.
Is there body cam footage or dash cam footage?
Currently, we do not have body cams in the city of Selma, nor dash cams, so, yeah.
Speaking to the support that the community's giving it, I mean, the memorials that are growing, the candlelight vigils that are happening nightly at this point, what is that to you as a police chief, seeing that not only pop up in Selma, but in Greeley, his hometown?
Again, it just adds to that whole, what I spoke to earlier. We're getting support from all over the nation. I think it's crucial to remind our brothers in law enforcement that we do have a lot of support out there, even though they're not out there and they're not the vocal. It's the vocal minority that's pushing that other sentiment. We have a lot of support, and we know that. That's why we continue to fight the good fight. And I think it's crucial, especially for our brothers in law enforcement, to remind them that they are supported, so that when they're out there servicing their communities, they feel that support to fight the good fight.
Chief, what's the current head count in terms of numbers of officers in Selma PD?
I can tell you we're budgeted for 39, and I think that like every other, you see, we're down officers. We were down officers prior to this tragic event, and however, we're continuously hiring and looking for great personnel to come service the citizens of Selma.
You mentioned that the sheriff's department had kind of stepped in to do some patrols while the Selma PD officers were taking time to grieve this loss. What sort of support has been available in terms of mental health support for your officers in your department?
So I believe it was Wednesday, and I apologize because these days are a blur, or yesterday, Thursday, we had an on-site counselor in the city of Selma for all of our employees. We will have a services on Monday, critical debrief on Monday for our personnel that are on site, and all of our personnel are sworn personnel. But beyond that, our fire department, the city of Selma has its own ambulance service. Our ambulance service are who transported Gonzalo to the hospital. They will also be included on that. And then we're connecting our personnel with additional services more long-term. However, we'll be assessing that every day. So our management team has done a phenomenal job in reaching out and identifying some of our personnel that just may from the outward surface look like they're taking a bit harder than others. And just because they convey that doesn't mean that someone that isn't showing that isn't. So we're just trying to be mindful the best we can to give those officers their time and making sure that they're communicating that we are there for them. All they have to do is reach out. So as they've come back into the office and we've taken patrol operations over as of 6 p.m. last night, it's going to be a better opportunity for us to get more hands-on with them. But in those first days following this event, we wanted to give them that time to kind of be with their families and digest all of this.
And you addressed my next question is, has Selma PD resumed taking over those patrols for sure?
Absolutely.
And that was at 6 p.m. last night?
Yes.
Thank you. Sheriff? Go ahead.
We're told, just going back to Carrasco, a little bit more of a personal story, we're told about that when he initially was going to be hired, there was a hiring freeze. Please say you're smiling, you might know what story I'm looking at.
So, best I can tell, or what I do know is he was a reserve officer with us at the time, and at that moment in time, our reserve officers didn't get paid. That being said, he couldn't afford to help support his family, so he went back to working in the fields with his parents to help support the family until we got an opening, at which time we called him and immediately offered him that job as a full-time sworn officer, and we're able to get him back into the office and getting paid as we would love to. But as you can understand, finances are always difficult. So, Absolutely, and no one was more deserving than that young man.
Sheriff Zanoni, you mentioned, can you once again describe the type of weapon that we're talking about that the suspect had?
The type of weapon that the suspect had was what we refer to as a ghost gun. It was a .223 caliber rifle. It was a ghost gun, basically, not serialized, not something that you could purchase through a normal legal gun dealer or store, something where people can either make the parts using a 3D printer or they can order them online and get them from here in America. You can get parts from China, all different places, and you can assemble the gun. You can actually have the gun serialized and you can have it registered. The gun could actually be legal. Unfortunately, that's a very, very small percentage of people that do that. Mostly it's just criminals who get guns that cannot be traced and tracked, and they use them to commit things like robberies and other violent crimes.
If somebody has a gun like that, is it obvious or is it easily spotted? If it's like a rifle, can they hide it on the person?
As far as like this type of weapon, hiding it,
Yeah, if you say rifle, I'm thinking of a big, long barrel gun.
about this big, give or take. You would be surprised in a lot of the videos that our gang task forces and other people get during the course of investigations, that you'll see an individual standing on a street corner in a street in the city of Fresno right in front of a car, and all of a sudden they'll pull an AR-15 rifle just like that right out of their pants with their shirt over it. It's not uncommon. Where there's a will, there's a way, and these individuals get them and they find ways to conceal them. So we don't see them and other people don't see them, but it's common. Anything else?
Just to clarify, we've heard it said a couple of different ways. So he was, Officer Carrasco was responding to a call or was just flagged down, or clarify that?
Officer Carrasco was on what we believe to be, he was not on a call. He was on a routine patrol in the area. At some point, he saw Mr. Dixon walking down the street. He went back. He made contact with him from his vehicle, was talking to him, and Mr. Dixon was in the front yard of a residence where he did not belong, and that's when a resident nearby came over and told Officer Carrasco that, hey, this individual doesn't live there, he doesn't belong here, and that's when the encounter started, and then shortly thereafter the shooting occurred.
I have one final question for you, District Attorney. When watching Governor Newsom react, when the reporter just a couple days ago, right after the situation, they asked about your comment on Facebook, he seemed agitated. Can you address him?
I don't think he seemed agitated. I think he was agitated because I think, it's typical Gavin Newsom, right? That's what he does. When he's caught flat-footed, he responds like a child. And, that was like a little temper tantrum, I think. And he's deflecting. He's putting out information from his office that is just not factual. So he either doesn't know or he's lying. And in my assessment, neither one of those is a good way to be when you're the governor. And you have to understand, Governor Newsom has aligned himself with imposter district attorneys like George Gascon and Chesa Boudin. In fact, Governor Newsom was the person who appointed George Gascon as the district attorney of San Francisco back in the day. And then when he went down to L.A., he endorsed him, supported him. And so he's part of those George Soros-funded DAs. And so I think his frustration, and it's funny, I think he said, I'm tired of being lectured by her about the criminal justice system, when I've never met Governor Newsom. I've never had a telephone conversation with him. I've never been in the same room with him. I don't know him. I've never spoken to him. So anything he has been lectured by me, I'm not really sure what he's talking about. I know I've been very critical of his policies, and probably one of the only district attorneys in the state of California that is unafraid to say what I think. And I think that the reason is, like this young lady brought up before, this is politics. And there's a lot of people that have a lot of money that are behind Governor Newsom. And other politicians maybe don't feel comfortable, being as boisterous as I am because they're afraid of, somebody coming and attacking their campaigns or coming and supporting an opponent for them. And I, quite frankly, don't care about that. If somebody wants to run against me and George Soros wants to fund an opponent against me, I say bring it on. Because my job is to protect the citizens and the residents of the county of Fresno. And when I see it, I got to say it like I see it and call it out like what it is. And right now, I think another thing that's really interesting is that right now in Sacramento, there is legislation pending over a proposed Assembly Bill 15, which is going to mandate by law that the Department of Corrections is required to give the information out on each inmate that comes through the prison system what time credits they're given. So this is another, thing. All of these things that Governor Newsom does, he does in the dark, right? So right now, if you call the Department of Corrections and you want information on the time credits given to an inmate, you're not going to get them as a reporter, as a citizen. But this law, if passed, AB 15, will make those records and those time credit allocations public records. They are not now. So what Governor Newsom is upset about is that Lisa Smittcamp is shining light in the midst of his darkness, because he does all of this in the dark.
And I have a question. What steps, if any, need to be taken to avoid a similar event from happening again?
We need to abolish 57, yeah.
Well, beyond the legislative changes, what I will say is, and I said this the other day, it doesn't matter how well we train our officers, the best tools that we give them, the support that we give them. If someone such as Mr. Dixon chooses to do what he does, we are almost guardless to something like this. I've spoke extensively with the investigators, and we all agree that there was nothing Officer Carrasco could have done. He was essentially executed. So these things, unfortunately, this is a reality of our business and our profession. So I would say that there's, in an instance like this, there's almost nothing other than God's grace on us.
Sheriff, you mentioned Dixon had dropped a gun and other items. Could you mention what those were and if they were,
At this point, that is all part of the investigation. And like I said, we're only about 72 hours in. I'm not going to say what that was. I just did say that the gun was recovered. But we're going to keep that as part of our investigation and not release it at this time.
Sheriff, are you under the impression, based on what you know right now, that Dixon was going to commit a burglary on the property he was at?
No. Based on the information that I have right now, it looks like, and I'm making a little bit of an assumption, that Mr. Dixon had saw the marked police unit from the Selma Police Department that Officer Carrasco was driving. He knew that he had the weapon on his person, and he went into the yard at that location so he wouldn't get checked or stopped by the officer. He was trying to go into that yard like he lived at that house, and that's at the point when Carrasco turned around and he engaged Dixon in conversation. And then once Carrasco got out of his vehicle, I believe that that's when Dixon realized that, he's got me, and at that point he took his action against Officer Carrasco and took his life. So, no, he was not committing a burglary. I cannot speculate as to what Mr. Dixon was doing. Walking around carrying a .223 assault rifle in a neighborhood like that in broad daylight is a very scary thought, and is something that is what scares community members, is how gang members like that possess those guns, and here they are at 11:52 in the morning walking through my neighborhood down the sidewalk.
Guys, we're going to keep to one more question. This is going on for a while, so if we have one more, we'll wrap it up.
Sheriff, was he living with his mother at the time? And how far was her house from the scene?
I don't have that information. We've served numerous search warrants. We've been conducting an investigation, and that's all part of the investigation, and we're not getting into those details right here and now. That is the last question, but I would like to say something in closing to get back on track here with Officer Gonzalo Carrasco, and that is the Fresno County Deputy Sheriff's Association is supporting the Selma Police Officers Association by establishing a memorial fund, which all donations will be given to Officer Carrasco's family. And please send donations and contributions to the Fresno Deputy Sheriff's Association, courtesy of the Selma Police Officer Association Memorial Fund, and that address is 1360 Van Ness Avenue, Fresno, California, zip code 93721. Thank you very much for being here today.
Just one more thing.
Oh, go ahead.
Sure.
Sorry.
Additionally, we will be updating the public with services information on our Selma Police Department Facebook page. Thank you.